What's up, lore masters? Before we begin, let's go ahead and define what this video isn't. It's not a rant, nor an attack, but a sad realization. You could define it as acceptance, honestly. I know it won't matter that I tell you all of this. Both sides are going to comment and give their opinion without actually watching it, but for those small few, let's just get into it. In my eyes, there are three eras of Star Trek. The first is the nostalgic era of Trek, which encompasses TOS, the TOS movies, TAS, TNG, the TNG movies, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, and most things made at this time. The JJ-verse would be the second, which encompasses the JJ-verse movies and certain comics and books. And lastly, we have the Discovery era, which involves everything being made during and after Discovery. And I'll go ahead and put it out there, hashtag not all. So if you're an exception to what I'm discussing, that's fantastic. And obviously, all of us are on a spectrum, so I don't think that it fits everyone exactly. You fall somewhere in the middle of what I'm about to discuss. However, for many of us who grew up during the era of TOS, TNG, Deep Space Nine, and others, Trek has been ingrained with certain ideals, thoughts, practices, and even decorum outside of the universe. There are certain preconcepts that make Trek Trek in the nostalgic era. This would include, but is not limited to, the idea that humanity was more than the sum of its parts, that there can be a happy future for humanity where we won't destroy each other. Yes, even in Deep Space Nine. On the whole, I would say there is generally an inclusivity to Star Trek, though this is heavily caveated from TNG on. And that's not to say that there weren't obvious missteps. Egregious missteps. But on the whole, it was family friendly. The look and feel also had an internal consistency. You could tell that Trek properties were Trek of that era, even when looking at Star Trek Enterprise, which is supposed to happen before the Federation. You knew you were looking at nostalgic Trek. And before I continue, for those of us who feel betrayed by the Discovery era, it's important to know and accept that changes, even drastic changes, occurred throughout the nostalgic era. In the Next Generation, there was an attempt to drop the moniker of Starfleet being a military, an outright attack on religion, and they even had concepts of wrongthing. The crew of the Enterprise had this superior attitude towards progressive ideals over that of the conservative ones. This isn't to say we didn't see some of this in the original series, but it was definitely a lot more prevalent in every series after the original. In Deep Space Nine, Trek went dark as the series explored themes of suicide, of war, and the uselessness of war, and a discussion on when good men lose their humanity to safeguard everything they believe in and everyone they love. Voyager moved more towards a lack of caring for continuity and a focus on someone's gender making them more powerful than that of their actual ability. It was subtle, but it was there. And no, it had nothing to do with the captain being a woman. Not that that'll stop you from commenting that that's what I'm talking about, but it's not. You also had what I would call the precursor to forced political bias, even moving into the toxic field in Voyager, but again, it was barely noticeable. Enterprise had a few in-your-face moments with politics and that stupid thing on evolution. Not to say that I don't believe in evolution, but the way they presented it was just horrific. But there wasn't much to that series that added in what I'm talking about. The movies of the nostalgic era are ultimately reflections of the series, and thus anything I have to add with them is just reflective of the series I was talking about. It is objective fact to say that Star Trek has always been changing and evolving no matter what era you're looking at. Again, you see this in Nostalgia Trek. In Nostalgia Trek, it changes a lot. You see this in the characters of the different series, and the way aliens will change in makeup and even culture, as well as the attitudes of those who produced the series. The JJ-verse was a move away from Star Trek in both the original intent of the universe and its aesthetics. Star Trek had generally been about exploration in the universe and humanity, preserving and living in utopia, and using your power to help the underdog. The JJ-verse dialed up everything, making it bigger, making it more flashy. The ships were bigger, the weapons did more damage. There was a move away from the individual characters, and it was more about explosions. However, even in this era, we see vestiges of the nostalgic Trek. There would be similar themes of self-discovery and maybe some mild exploration. The JJ-verse was definitely something different. They changed the entire history and tale. They weren't bashful about it. During the JJ-verse era, they had celebrated that this wasn't your dad's Trek. JJ-verse was new, it was bright, it was flashy. This was the next step. You got to see Kirk, Uhura, and others in a way that you hadn't seen them before. It was a reboot. But the JJ-verse era wasn't something that fans apparently wanted. There was an outcry, a rebellion. So in the next step of Star Trek, in the Discovery era, it was claimed to be a return to the status quo. This was going to be during the Prime timeline. This was going to be what fans wanted. This was Nostalgia Trek again. But was it? This series was based on gender identity, not just promoting liberal and progressive ideals, but actual attack on conservative policies and anti-Trump rhetoric. The series also focused on much darker aspects of Trek with arcs that run throughout the seasons. The actual series would not focus as much on the main bridge crew, but the more diverse members of the ship. It would show more than just humans on ships as well. The vessels were diverse with multiple different aliens. There would be a return to the ship feeling like it was run in a more militaristic style, similar to that of the original series. The graphics would also be off the charts good, making any other series pale in comparison. The problem with all of this, well, take it away, Spoonie. The writers, the executives, the actors, the marketing, it all lied. They stated that this was Nostalgia Trek before it came out. It was in the Prime timeline and returning to what had been. I remember actors, executives, and the marketing saying, see, it's in the Prime timeline. It's fun for the whole family. It's what you wanted and missed from the JJ-verse. But it wasn't. This wasn't anything like what Trek was. Not in spirit, not in visuals, not in continuity. You know, I truly realized that the era of Nostalgia Trek was dead while reading an article by Trek Movie. Links of the article in the description below. In that article, executive producer Heather Caden was quoted as saying, "It's been a real conscious effort that every project we do have its own voice and occupy its own space. I don't mean its own space in canon, I mean its own tonal vision. Because you shouldn't tune in to Discovery and wonder if you flipped the channel, that it was Picard. They should feel different. They should have different messages coming from different people." The Nostalgia Trek era had always had the comfort of being similar, of having similar themes and messages. They weren't vastly different shows, they weren't different concepts, they were just a different perspective of the same coin. But now, the people who are producing the different series are celebrating that the newest animation will be a comedy series that focuses on the least important ship in the fleet. What? Nostalgia Trek always took a more serious focus, though comedy elements existed with the odd-out episodes. And it was about how everyone was important, how everyone could change their destiny. And now you have this? And there it is. This is not Nostalgia Trek. This isn't a return to anything. All of the heeing and hawing about going back to the Prime timeline, and about a return to what was. All of this being said in spirit and tone, if not them outright saying it. And we see that it's not. This isn't the revitalization of the Nostalgia Trek era, this is the genesis of the Discovery era. And you know what? That's okay. As we saw within the Nostalgia Trek era itself, things can change drastically. The problem I have with the Discovery era is the deception. JJ-verse gets a lot of hell, granted, but they didn't even try to say they were the same.
Hey, farm boy.
I'm impressed.
And for that, you have to give at least some credit to J.J. Abrams. They didn't want to deal with the past, so they just rewrote the book. The Discovery era pretended it was something it's not, and because of that, we are where we are. So, the Discovery era isn't the Nostalgia Trek era. Now what? Well, for me, it's more of an acceptance of where we are. I can finally relax a bit and just let what happens happen. In canon, my definition of the IP holder deciding what is canon and what is not will stay. Whether it's Nostalgia Trek, JJ-verse, or Discovery era, whatever CBS and Paramount decides to make canon will be reflective in my work, when I do alpha canon at least. Though, don't worry, I don't intend to not rip Discovery era into shreds if it continues to make no sense continuity-wise. Discovery era has divided this fanbase badly. Worse than I think I've ever seen. These days, it feels like you have those who more identify with the politics of the shows, often bigger channels that may or may not have a monetary reason to be pro-Discovery era, and new audiences who enjoy the Discovery era that didn't grow up with Nostalgia Trek. And then you have those with rose-colored glasses that think there weren't issues with the Nostalgia Trek era, that this is just an attempt to push PC culture in our lives. Generally smaller channels that may or may not have found out that hate sells. And of course the disenfranchised Trekkies that miss their youth. Now like I said, these are just extremes. Everything is on a spectrum and most people fall somewhere in the middle. But you get the idea. We need to accept that Trek has changed and will stay changed. That's all there is to it. There isn't much more than that, and to think otherwise is tilting at windmills. Now, I'm not saying that we stop being vocal about what we like, what we want to see, and that we want a return to nostalgia Trek. I'm far from that. I'll be comparing and contrasting the two different eras until the cows come home. But the tone and spirit in which we do it needs to change. This is vitally important, especially if I'm wrong and there is to be a return to nostalgia Trek. But those are my thoughts. What are yours? Ultimately, all of our lives are a story. Make yours a good one. Hey guys, please be here on November 3rd when I'll be doing a 24-hour live stream. This will include playing games, special guests, and I may actually dress up in women's leggings and a bad sweater to walk around my hometown and go get food. You won't want to miss that. November 3rd to November 4th, starting at 5 a.m. Central Standard Time in the morning. I'll see you there.